Hello, this is Laurel Anderson with a demo on how to make a quilt facing. This finishes all the edges without the handwork. First, cut the batting, backing, and front of your quilt about 2 to 3 inches larger. Cut your facing fabric about 1 inch larger than the facing frame. Then the back of the quilt and the facing frame fabric need to be sprayed with Terrio Magic. This is optional, but it really helps. You want to spray those two fabrics enough so that they are saturated and you don't have any dry spots left over. I usually do this in a Ziploc bag and let it sit for at least 10 minutes so that the fibers absorb all of the Terrio Magic. This isn't actually a starch, but it behaves like a super starch, leaving you with a nice, crisp, firm fabric that won't warp on the diagonal when you're trying to stitch on detail strips. Then cut your 1-inch detail strips on the true diagonal so that they will not wrinkle up when you're trying to curve them around sharp curves. Stitch 1/4 inch diagonal seams in them so that you can connect all of the strips, and then trim the seam allowance so it's 1/4 inch. Press these detail strips in half, wrong sides together, so they are 1/2 inch wide. Your fabric should be ready to press. Press it until it's wrinkle-free and flat. Layer your quilt backing, your batting, and then your quilt front in that order, and then pin well. Next, you want to free motion quilt this quilt sandwich. Do it as you like. I put some leaves and some little round shapes in mine and a few curlicues. Quilt all the way to the outer edges. These outer edges won't show, but it helps the whole entire quilt to lie flat throughout the whole process. I usually put Scotch restickable glue on the back of my paper template so that it will stay in place. At the beginning of the detail strip, press under 1/4 inch. Then lay the detail strip with the fold side next to the paper template and the raw edge side pointing away from the paper. Pin well. When you come to the end of the detail strip, tuck it underneath and inside of the beginning. Put a contrasting thread in your bobbin and stitch right down the middle of these detail strips. That's 1/4 inch away from the fold. Both the inner one, the oval, and the outer one, the rectangle. So both of these are stitched to the right side of your fabric. Now, place this face down on your quilt sandwich. So the front of the quilted section and the front of the detail strips face each other. Then stitch on the outer rectangle stitching line. That's why you put the contrasting thread in there, so you could see that stitching line. Do not stitch on the oval. Then carefully trim all of the seam allowance. You want the batting to be the shortest part of your trimming. Then pull up on the center oval and cut inside of the oval, just far enough inside from that oval stitching line so that you completely miss the raw edges of the detail strips. This would be about 1/4 inch in from the stitching line. So cut that inner oval out, making sure you don't slice through your quilting or your quilt front. Next, you want to clip all the seam allowances all the way around so that your end result will lie flat. This just takes a little bit of extra time, but it makes a big difference in the end result. Turn everything right side out. The facing comes to the front of the quilt. Pull in the detail strips around the rectangular edge to get it to lie flat, and then to press all of the edges so they're nice and flat. Then turn under the inner oval detail strips and press those as well so that the raw edges are out of the way. Pin those to the front of the quilt and stitch right down the line where the facing fabric meets the detail strip fabric. This will finish all the edges of your quilt with no handwork. If you want to put stems or anything tucked underneath this facing, do it before you do the final stitching. And as soon as you get this stitching done, you're ready to quilt the outer edges. Don't quilt them heavily or you'll turn the detail strips into ruffles. quilt something decorative or put something decorative in the edges, and that is how to make a facing on a quilt. This has been Laurel Anderson with a quilt facing demo.